In today's podcast, we are talking all things leadership.
Yes, we're talking about not getting messy with the roles.
We're talking about team concept.
And all the good stuff. So we hope that you enjoy this.
Let's get into it. Hey everybody, my name is Brittney Kuklinski and I'm right here with
Lorraine Lopez.
And we are so excited because we are talking all things leadership.
Yes.
And what's kind of cool is that not just any topical leadership kind of talk, we're talking about the dynamics of kind of how we did things.
Yeah.
Before we even came a team at the Rip Hollywood, the base, we were actually functioning as a team in this crazy dynamic. Why don't you share a little bit about our dynamic going back and then where we're at now today?
Yeah, it's a fun dynamic. And
It is.
a little complicated on paper. But in a season that we found ourselves in before is where you were my gang girl leader. Mm-hmm. I was your regional and you were my multi.
It was crazy. When explaining it to people was hilarious, but we loved it.
Yeah. I think we didn't realize at that time how useful that season was going to be for us.
Right.
And just working with other leaders, looking back, and we just kind of made it work. It wasn't about, well, who's a leader? Like, who's an authority? Who's leading this meeting? I think we kind of just really learned to gel with each other and make it work in all those settings, like the setting locally, regionally, and even multi level. And so I think that was a fun season.
It was. And then I think for some people, I think we talked about sometimes it could get a little messy.
Yeah.
Because especially dealing with leadership, we're dealing with different levels. Locally, I felt like, Lorraine, you had my back to the fullest. And then when it came time to regionally, I'm like, let's go, Gango Regional. Mm-hmm. And then when multi, it shifted back. And I think that's what made leadership not only fun and interesting, but we were able to come under one another, respecting of that leadership title and that role.
Yeah, I think we really understood the big picture of it all.
Yeah.
It wasn't more about who's calling the shot or who's leading this. Like I said, it wasn't making it messy. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the challenge, is that there is that temptation to make it about those things.
That's true.
And that's not the purpose of it. The purpose is that we recognize in certain settings, someone else is taking lead. And that was the beginning of us understanding what team could look like when we're not necessarily on paper written down as a team.
Right. And it wasn't so easy either. I think we found our challenges because it was different. I think it was different, especially we didn't start off in that role. We started off just at the local ministry, Gango ministry. And then with time in leadership, and obviously leadership, you have titles. With that came the different dynamics. And it wasn't easy because we already had a friendship in the works of and building. And then we literally, I think because we had that friendship and we had that good chemistry, we were able to build upon it. And I think even that, so I know maybe we talk about it in a different one about friendship, but what do you think maybe some of the challenges that we had to overcome to have that dynamic that was successful in the end?
I think that's a part of it. The friendship is the relationship behind it.
Right.
You know, it's not just looking at it from a task perspective, but relationally, recognizing that this is someone I'm going to see in many other settings.
Right.
I need to invest here. And I think that's kind of what happened. It was during the end of the crazy 2020.
Yeah.
We were on...
Don't say the name.
One time we were on so many Zooms. It was like, I'll see you in the morning, I'll see you at the afternoon, and then I'll see you in the evening too on Zoom. And so I remember personally feeling like God was saying, you need to give attention to this relationship. And so that's when, send you a coffee and little things like that, because I felt like I need to invest here because God is aligning us to come, side by side and let's build together. Right. And so I think you have to be willing to see what God is trying to show you.
Right.
And if not, you can make it about yourself. Self always wants to get in the way.
Right.
Whether it be insecurities, whether it be past experiences with people.
Right.
You might have had a bad experience with another co-laborer. And so you have to be willing to say, okay, I have to recognize what is God doing now. And so I know that was something God showed me. And so I began to, kind of invest in that. I know you did as well. And it showed. And we weren't looking to model in the moment, but I know that it did.
Right.
I know that it did. I remember one time in the multi-setting, you had to get your regionals gifts, and you got me one. I was like, you didn't have to get me a gift, but I think that was the fruit of the investment that we made in a two-way perspective.
And I think too, because even with getting you a gift, because I wanted to show like obviously appreciation. I thought, am I minimizing your influence by doing that? And so it was a struggle, I think, a tussle, for some would say. And I think for me, I was like, should I get her a gift? Will that minimize? But I think you knew my heart was I wanted you to be included. And I'm a big girly on inclusiveness. I'm like, if you want it, you want to be a part, I want you to be included. So I feel like you knew my heart. It was never, some people might take it like to offense. Like, I'm not,
so true.
I am not just your Gang Girl Regional. Like, you were also a multi.
Yeah.
For another multi. And so I think some people could take it maybe in that form, but I think it goes back to that friendship, that chemistry, and that now we see flourishing at the base in Hollywood. And I think that was why we're able to, this beautiful weekend, we just got through our grand opening and in the past, and it was just amazing. But it reminded me of us laboring together in different roles and how we're able to just collectively come together. Yeah. And despite anything, we're like, okay, the pins need to be on the paper. Let's go. Let's do the pins. And I think that's what makes strong leadership. And I think it makes strong friendship and making ministry together being fun.
Yeah. And a lot of it all kind of narrows down to intentionality. Like if you're not intentional, you can miss out on that.
Right.
And I think that was another thing that I learned from that season was like, I almost missed out on a great friendship had I not been intentional and recognizing what God was doing as he was placing us and what could have looked like a mistake or like they must have not overlooked that or you didn't think that went through. You know? It could have looked like that in the natural, but really God had other plans for it. Right. And so I think it requires people to be intentional because I even think of other people, perhaps in the same scenario now, and maybe it's not going as smooth.
Right.
What could it be that they're missing? What factors are they not considering, or what steps are they not taking, or what are they not mindful of? That kind of comes to mind. And so maybe perhaps there's somebody in a situation like ours. What advice would you give them?
I think I always say this, and I say it with full intentionality of if you do things with a pure heart, no one really could, even if they do perceive it the wrong way. In the end, you do it with a pure heart.
Yeah.
And I think when you do that, when you serve God with a pure heart, you're able to come alongside anybody. And I think if you want to see something done, you don't mind coming under anybody. And I think that's a big thing. It takes a big leader to be a humble leader. And that's something that has to be shifted with mindset. It's you never arrive. And if you have that mindset, I'm never a rival, then you're willing to serve at any capacity. Yeah. And I think if we shift that and we understand that, then we're going to be effective in all areas. And so to the one that maybe is struggling with that, maybe dual roles where it is kind of tricky, it can get a little bit messy. I think the main thing about that is really investing into that relationship and then also making sure that you're pulling out what you can pull out from that relationship. You're depositing, but you're pulling out. Because again, like you said, you could have missed out. I could have missed out too. I could have missed out on someone that I think is very influential. I think you're an amazing mom. You're an amazing wife. And of course, we learn from one another. But because if you get so tied up in your title, tied up in that role, you can miss out on a lot. Yeah. So I think when you take everything away and you just want to see God's hand move in that role, in that ministry, there should be no he said, she said, or I'm in this position, etc. It should be like, let's just get this done and I'll come under you in any capacity. If you think is the best move, let's just do it. And I think you learn that at the base. Yeah. You learn how to have healthy conflict, healthy conversation. And can you attest or can you think of any type of conversation that or scenario that maybe we've had at the base that you could think others maybe can grow from or learn from?
Yeah, I love this question because I know that a lot of what people see is social media. You know, you see our cool drinks, you see our cool atmosphere.
Like right now.
People are like, I want to go get a sticker. I want to customize it.
Right.
Slap it on a cup and have it there. But what I love that separates us is more than a cup. Like it's more than a sticker. It's the internal setup that we have.
Right.
And that is team ministry.
Right.
It's true team ministry that when you get in meetings, there's different people leading them.
Right.
Based on what we're trying to accomplish.
Right.
Like, what are we trying to accomplish? What are we trying to do? If it's Hollywood Social, then we know it's that team and we just shift our posture.
Yep.
It's not like, well, I'm postured here because my ministry is here and that doesn't necessarily have, a lot of my responsibility involved. So I'll let them do their thing. No, it's like we shift. Right. And then it's, okay, now it's going to be a meeting for this. Let's shift here. And so that's what I love about being there at the base is that we see those shifts take place and we just back each other up.
Right.
You know, so I think that's something that we get to experience daily, really, and I know that I've been in other settings where we call ourselves team. I think back when I played sports, like called ourselves team and then we show up on the court and it's like, that was not a team. You were doing your own thing, girl,
Yeah.
And so it's always shows in the fruit, it always will show in the fruits of how things are accomplished and how things are done.
Yeah. And I think we talk about so much at the base, team concept, team chemistry. And I know we reflect back to La Puente days with the mother church because Pastor Sunny and Sister Julie often mention how they function as a team. And I think what we're taking back now is as they're coaching us, we're learning how to function as a team. And I think along the way, we learned some good ways like camaraderie, chemistry, are great ways to have a great team. What are some chemistry killers that you could think of that you would like to share with somebody that maybe haven't really encountered it, or you can see how we prevented it in a team?
Yeah, I think one that comes to mind is when you think it's all about the role, not the goal. When you get caught up in your role and make it more about yourself, you're missing out in meetings, in conversations, and confrontation. Like confrontation is necessary.
Yeah.
It's a healthy thing. And oftentimes people have the wrong experiences with confrontation. So they bring that perspective to team ministry. But when you recognize what it is, you understand that in a healthy way, it's about the goal. It's not a personal thing, and oftentimes people want to bring their personal offenses, or they want to bring their preferences, but the goal is about the principle.
Right.
And I think that that's one thing that, can kind of challenge a team is when people are so consumed with their role and what their perspective is and their view. But when you have that posture of it's about the overall, then you're willing to humble yourself when necessary.
Right.
You're willing to support an idea that's probably better than yours, and that's not always easy when you're more consumed with the role, like your voice, your prestige, whatever it is that we can kind of as humans make it about, but it's identifying, recognizing this is about what we're accomplishing. And it's keeping the main thing. I know another thing is because we're all, on our phones and we have group chats, the side conversations.
Right.
I think that is one of the biggest killers. If you can not be comfortable to say at the table, then you shouldn't be that comfortable to say it on the side.
Right.
Like it has to be addressed as a team. If not, what happens is like you're creating a sub team. Like you're bringing a separation there, and that could get really messy and really ugly. And then you're also affirming something. You're affirming an action that we as a team don't agree with.
Right.
And so that could happen with old teammates. It could happen with new teammates. And so you got to be careful that you're not the one leading that. And if you're in that, then leave the chat.
Yeah.
Leave the side chat, because that could really destroy, because then now you're giving room for the enemy to just add on to there, to just stir it up. And we don't want that. We want unity, I think that's just so important to have.
Right. I think another one that I can think of is like the ball droppers. I think that because of team, I think there's a trust that's built there. And so when you give someone something and they just drop it, I think it not only just affects obviously the ministry or whatever you're trying to put on, it affects the relationship. Now, I trusted you. I gave you this, and I knew you could do it because you had great ideas, and then they drop it. Have you ever had to deal with somebody or had to bring it out or conversate about that? And if so, how did you deal with it?
Yeah, I think it kind of depends on where they're at in their process of being on the team. Meaning this, are they new? Was this my first time learning? I think that can teach. I learned for myself, about myself and about the individual, because it was my first time seeing where their true capacity was at.
Right.
And I learned what their understanding of follow through was, or what their understanding of communication was. And so as much as in the moment, it's like the heat of the moment, and you're like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
But you kind of have to pause and say, okay, now that I recognize this is where they're at, I'm not going to shy away from it. It's a teaching moment.
Right.
However, it's also a teaching moment for me to understand, like, this is their capacity and how can we grow this?
Right.
So in conversation, it's bringing to their attention, asking questions, because it's always good to know how they felt. You know, sometimes they think, oh yeah, I did what was best.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm like, no, girl, that was not what was best. And so I think hearing from them first really helps to learn more about their understanding.
Right.
Because everybody brings a different experience to the team.
Right.
They bring a different understanding of leadership. They bring a different understanding of communication, their capacity. They might have, I think we've heard it shared, they're like the big fish in a small pond, and then they come over here and it's like, oh, it is bigger, larger, you know, it's the ocean. And so because of that, I think really having them to see it, that's the main thing, is having them gain the understanding. Right. You didn't see this, but do you see it?
Right.
Because if you don't see it, it becomes a rule.
Right.
The rule is never forget the stickers. You know, it's like, it's not about the stickers. You know,
no.
It's about being able to communicate. It's about being able to follow through. It's about being able to, you know, have that accountability. Whatever the issue is, I think it's really making sure that they're leaving this conversation with understanding. If they don't have understanding, we're gonna come to this conversation again. Right. And so I think for myself, it's always like, okay, where's the understanding at, as well as what have I learned from this? Right. You know, about the individual. Not that you don't give them another chance or another opportunity, but now you know how to challenge them a little bit better.
Exactly. I think great leaders ask questions, and you can't expect to lead someone or help guide them if you're not asking questions. Yeah. And I think that's a great understanding of that. I know Sister Julie had mentioned that in the past. She said that she'd be like, okay, I told you this, now say it back to me. And I think sometimes you're like, when someone's saying it back, they're like, why am I doing this? But it's because I want to understand if you understood. And I think that's big because I know this past recent event that we had, we talked about all hands on deck. And then we're like, where are the hands? You know? And I think we could have did a better job as leaders. And I think we did it maybe a little too late, but we asked, okay, where's everyone's hands at? And I think as
you gotta get direct.
Direct, yes. And like they say back into common saying, inspect what you expect. Yeah. And I think we have to do tightening up on that, even in team, because again, like that trust, and you give it to them, and you know they have the capacity to do it. You know they're gifted and talented. But now let's just make sure that we're all on the same page, that we all have understanding of what everyone's role is. And I think that could really impact any event or any leadership.
And there's different seasons that teams go through. They have the off season, the preseason, and then the main.
Yes, yes.
And so I think even in that, I think we're learning like, oh, the rhythm has shifted. Right. So we're like, let's get all the team on board.
We lost
like,
rhythm.
Let's make sure we all recognize, you know. Right. And we're doing, you know, we're looking for ways to help them. We're like, who needs help with planning? Does everybody have a calendar? You know? Right. And we're looking for these ways to help because we recognize, we felt it. Okay, the season has shifted. The rhythm has shifted. And how could we make sure that, you know, everybody, every single teammate is on board and ready to go? Right.
And you know what? Looking at specifically at the base at Hollywood, or even a lot of the bases, a lot of them function locally, but then they'll also function internationally. Like, for example, at Hollywood, we have a lot of them functioning in international gang, pathways, United We Can, and multi-regional, regional staff at the UTC, staff at the Third Way Leadership Campus, or directors-wise, pastors, and there's a lot of roles going on there. And how would you think the best way for a leader to be effective in all elements? Because it gets challenging. I think for all of us. Little side note is we had a radical meeting recently. We had a 6:30 a.m. Yes, I'm saying that right. In the morning meeting with pastors' wives because our calendars collided so much. So we said, okay, what time is everyone's calendar off? 6:30 in the morning. So we had to do it. Yeah. But what do you say to those that have multiple roles and want to be effective in all things?
A practical thing that has really helped, in seasons where they're busy and I have multiple hats, I like to write down every hat.
Every hat. Mm-hmm.
One, I'm a child of God. I got to spend my time with the Lord. Mm-hmm. I'm a wife. I'm a mom. I'm a student. I'm a leader. And so I'll write all these hats down.
Right.
Then I will write down what do I have to do to be effective in those.
Right.
So then it tells me what I need to do, like practically spending time I need to meet. And so from there, then I'll say, how often do these have to happen? Some have to happen daily.
Right.
Some weekly, some monthly, some just twice a year.
Yeah. Right.
Depending on what the hat is.
Right.
And so I think when you really break it down like that, you're intentional, you look for the windows, and you know how to prioritize what's important. I've heard it said that when you look at your calendar, when you look at your time, and when you look at your bank statements, you know what you value. And so we can have these titles, or we could have these roles we have kids, or by paper, whatever the case may be. But if we want to be effective in them, we have to be intentional in making sure that we're having these moments where we recognize, like, whether it's a slow season or a fast season. I know in fast seasons, I have to live by the day. Like, I have to go over the schedule. Like, me and my husband were like, what does tomorrow look like?
Yeah.
And then if it's a slower season, we're like, well, what's the week look like? You kind of, you work with it, but it's all goes back to intentionality. You have to be intentional and really look at it and ask yourself, have those honest evaluations. I remember one time in doing this, I recognized, I'm kind of neglecting one of these hats. And I remember seeking out God for creativity. How could I maximize this? How could I be more effective? How could I work smarter, not harder? And I remember God gave me a strategy. He said, meet once a month with the region and have them host.
Yes.
As if you're hosting, that's more. And so he's like, have them host, have them, share 5 minutes, because then now they're sharing in the teaching, like they're sharing in the workload, and it was purposeful, it was intentional. And so that was a season where I had to really give of myself to the region. And then after that year, they got to another place with everything else, they got to a place where I didn't have to be as hands-on. And so there's different rhythms and season in each of our hats. And so even for the mom, for the mom, she has that season where she's with the stroller outside, because they're like newborns. And then there's a season where, then she's there, the child's there in nursery. And so each of these roles will go through different seasons, but we can't neglect them.
Right.
And we have to recognize that if God has given us them, He's going to give us the capacity for them as well.
100%. I think another thing too is my husband and myself, we both made it a challenge that if it's on the calendar, we are not taking it off. Like, we are holding on to it. And why? Because sometimes it would make sense to shift something or change a meeting date. But what does it do? It puts it on for another date. Mm-hmm. And it ends up into like a snowball effect where you're trying to catch up with all these responsibilities. And so now, like you, we don't have the calendar, but we do notes. And we put in detail, like from Syra to ministry to dropping off pickups, and my workload, my husband has to come in, meetings to corporate. And what that does is makes us effective. And I was sharing that as a wife and releasing my husband and understanding the role that he's in, I have to be really effective with my time management. And I think that sometimes can get away from us when we aren't scheduling in our calendar, and time will get away from us. And if we don't manage time will manage us.
Yeah.
And that's why even as leaders, and the higher we go up, the more we're going to have to carry and to juggle. And how much more effective can we be if we're taking a hold of our time?
Yeah. Something I heard recently was that often we'll consider, for the most part, the financial cost when we're scheduling. We'll consider the distance, we'll consider the time, but we don't always consider what we give of ourselves emotionally and mentally.
That's true.
And so it was sharing about how even when you schedule, to consider that, because if you schedule all these meetings on paper, it looks good, but then you're there and you're like in the third meeting, you're like slumped.
Right.
You're trying to give your best because it's fresh people, but it's not your first meeting. And so that was something I recently heard, and I was like, okay, I'm going to take that because that's so true.
Yeah, that's really good. And I think just in leadership, we've from the beginning and learning and understanding, I feel like everyone has their season in their life. And I think it's so big that in leadership, whatever role capacity, whether it's a connect group leader, whatever capacity a leader is, if you're a leader in your home, if you're a mother or whatever that looks like, I think every season has its moments, and we have to take captive of that and be responsible for what God given us. And like you said, whatever God gives us, he'll give us the time to maximize it and be effective in it.
Yeah, and I think even for the person that maybe perhaps they used to be very active in leadership, and now they're in a season where maybe, shifts have been made, and not that anything was done wrong, but now they find themselves with just more time. And sometimes people could create their identity in a role that when the role is gone, they lose themselves. But I think it's important to know that regardless of our role on title, on paper, that we've all been commanded to make disciples.
Right.
And that is something that you could always find purpose in.
That's so good.
You will always find purpose in every season and every moment, knowing that you have the opportunity to make disciples for Christ. And so to the person, that might feel like, well, I'm not that anymore, I'm not this, or I'm not in that meeting or in that room, just know that you're in the room that God has you in for a reason, and that he wants you to make the most of this season, that he doesn't want you to neglect the season or despise the season, but recognize the opportunity. He's probably placing a people in front of you that you might be missing. But the Bible says that he's commanded us to go, therefore, into all the world and to make disciples. And so even in this season, God wants to use you to make an impact. It might look different. You might got to get more creative with it, but run with it because God has instructed you to do so.
Yeah, that's so good. And I like to speak to that leader, and maybe you're juggling quite a bit and you feel like, Lord, what's happening? What's taking place? And I just want to reassure you that God placed you. You're the right person for the job, and to remind yourself that whatever he brought you to, that you have the goods for it. And I love the word of God. It says, he that began a good work in you will bring it to completion at the day of Jesus Christ. So if it ain't good yet, it ain't done. And I want to encourage you with that, because he began a good work in you, and he will bring it to completion, whatever that looks like. And to encourage you and to stay strong and be that leader that's effective, and be that leader that puts the boots on the ground and says, when I leave this role, when I leave this ministry, it's going to have a stamp of approval, my name on it, because I gave my all to it. I want everyone to know that when they position me, I'm going to be that leader they could count on. I'm going to be that team member that they could look to. And I want to be effective in whatever God places me in. And here today, me and Lo, we got down and talked about leadership and just, wanted to hang out and talk to all of you here today. And we just pray that whatever capacity God places in your life of leadership, that you do it with a full heart and you do it unto the Lord, because ultimately that's what it's all about, serving God with a full heart. And we pray you're blessed today, and we'll see you very soon.